computer. Okay, we are recording. I'm here with Michael Elsner. Hello, Michael.
Hey, how are you doing?
I'm great, man. I'm great.
Fantastic.
So I'm going to read the official intro words here. Hello and welcome to today's interview on the 2020 Music Industry Evolution Summit. I'm your host, David Brownstein, and I want to introduce you to our guest today, Michael Elsner. Michael, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thanks for having me, David. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. For those who don't know Michael, I'm going to read some of his bio right here. With a career spanning over 20 years as a guitarist, songwriter, composer, and producer, Michael Elsner has produced over 2,000 song placements in TV shows, films, commercials, video games, and film trailers. Michael's songs have been placed in over 180 individual television series, accounting for over 800 individual episodes. That's a lot of television.
Yeah.
Great. Some of these placements have included American Idol, The Voice, Amazon's Jack Ryan, Sneaky Pete, Cinderella, Disney's Cinderella, and Maleficent 2. He is the author of Master Music Licensing, the 4-step plan to licensing success, and to teach other. I think I might have screwed this up in the copy and paste.
That's
But
okay.
Master Music Licensing,
Sounds great.
rockin'. We're good. We're good.
Yeah.
So before we get into the music licensing thing, I want to just talk about a little bit of creativity. And you're a guitar player. That's your main instrument. I just kind of wanted to ask you, who's your first guitar hero? What's some of your first guitar god heroes?
There's a great story to that. My first guitar hero is a guy named Paul Gilbert, and the reason why he was my first guitar hero is I was on a vacation with my mom in a small town in North Carolina. We always spent the summer at my grandparents' place or her parents' place in North Carolina. I grew up in upstate New York, and we'd be there like 6 weeks, throughout the summer. And they lived on a little farm, 6 acres up in Franklin, North Carolina, and it'd get kind of boring. Up there. And we were one day checking out at like the Piggly Wiggly or the Winn-Dixie or one of those, two stores they had in town. And there was a tape by a group called Eraser X. It was called Live Extreme Volume. And I still remember being in the checkout. I still remember being in the checkout counter and just pulling it out and looking at it, and had these guys all sweaty playing these cool guitars. And I thought, oh, this looks really cool. And I asked my mom to buy it for me. And she bought it for me. And I remember going home and going up to the second floor of my grandparents' house and listening to it. And the first song, it's a live record, first song that came on just blew my mind. I mean, the guitar playing on it was just ferocious and scary. And that's when I thought I need to start playing guitar. And that was the summer. And then Christmas of that year, so like roughly 6 months later, my parents got me a little, like $100 guitar and $50 amplifier. And that's how it started. And I was, I think, 12.
Wow.
12 or just turning 13. Yeah.
Wow. That's great. That's great. And were you a blues guitarist? What was your sort of first style?
That was the late 80s. And so I guess that was like 88, 87, 88. I guess, yeah. And so I just started playing, at that time it was bands like Bon Jovi and stuff like that.
Right.
And I was, and then Paul, shortly thereafter, like right after I started playing guitar, his band, Mr. Big, came out. He left Racer X and formed Mr. Big with a bunch of guys. And the funny thing is that they were my favorite band. I know, people think of them when it comes to like the song, oh crap, I even forgot their ballad. Whatever, the ballad song, which is really insignificant to me because they were such a great rock band. But it's funny because, then I moved to Los Angeles in the early 2000s, and I ended up meeting Paul. And then I ended up working with Paul on a bunch of records. In fact, over the corners, a couple of records I did with him. And then I ended up touring with him and traveling with him. And so it kind of came full circle. And the first time I was ever in a guitar magazine was with Paul. So it was just a really cool experience to have, he inspired me to get into music and play music, and then to have kind of come full circle and gotten to know all the guys in the band and travel with them and whatnot. It was awesome.
Oh, that's great. So you've had a real career as a player and performer and recorder and writer. And how did you get into this sync licensing thing? And just by the way, how would you define what sync licensing is, and why do they call it sync? I mean, I know.
Well, sync because it's synchronizing music to video. Okay, so it's a synchronization license. And that's why it's called sync, because you're actually synchronizing music to picture. And picture meaning moving picture. So that's why it's called sync or synchronization. And the actual full term of the license is a synchronization license. people they shorten it down to, I want to get a sync, I want to get a placement, meaning a TV placement, a song placed on a TV show or a commercial. It's really called placements. So those are like, that's like the shorthand for basically a synchronization license.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a bit that goes into actually, a synchronization license. There's actually two licenses within that synchronization license. So you think of it like a synchronization license or a sync license is like a folder. And when you open up that folder, there are two little pieces of paper in there, and one is a master license and one is also called a sync license. And that's where it can kind of get confusing. The master license is basically granted by whoever owns the master recording. All right. So if I was working on a TV show and I wanted to license a particular song, I have to reach out to the person who owns the master recording, which generally is going to be the record label. Or if you're working with independent artists, it's going to be the independent artist, right? But if it's like, say, like John Mayer, if I was licensing a John Mayer tune, I'd have to reach out to his record label because his record label paid for the recording. They own the masters. So in that case, the owner of the recording, the actual recording, the audio recording, they're the one who grants the master license. And then when it comes to the sync license portion of it, again, these are just two things inside that big folder called synchronization.
But they're both called sync licenses?
Yeah, that's kind of where it gets a little confusing. But the sync license is actually granted by whoever owns the publishing on the song. All right. So you have
songwriter,
two owners. You have the publisher and you have the master owner. Right. And actually, the songwriter is not really in that equation unless the songwriter owns a master or owns the publishing. So those two are the
I'm sorry. The songwriter does not need to give clearance for
the songwriter, if the songwriter does not own their publishing, then no, they don't, because the publisher controls the copyright. So it's, kind of going back to like the basics of publishing. When you have a song, you have, if I just write a song by myself right now, no one automatically gets that publishing until I sign it over to them. Right?
Okay. Right.
So if you and I write a song right now, and there was someone waiting in the wings to license it, they would actually license it through us because we would own the master, because we would record it ourselves and pay for it, and we also would have the publishing on our own. But if we were to sign that over to, say, we had a publishing deal, then our publisher would control that. Or if we signed it over to a music library, which in the licensing world is a publishing deal, libraries in the licensing world are publishers. So then the publisher or the library in that case would be the one who's granting the permission for the sync license, the sync portion of it. Now, granted, keep in mind that when I say sync license, I'm really referring to the entire folder. And inside that folder are those two licenses. Right?
And just carry curiosity, is there a split between what percent goes to the master, what percent goes to the publishing? Is it about equal, or is it?
That's a great question. So it can change. Now it's kind of like licensing is like real estate. Okay, everything really is ultimately negotiable. Mm-hmm. But in the licensing world, there's a term called most favored nations. All right, and what that means is that if it's a most favored nations clause, that means that it's going to be an equal amount between the publishing and the master owner, right? So, for example, the master owner couldn't say, well, we want 50,000, and the publisher says, well, I want 10,000, and then it'd be kind of a little off, right? So you'd have a most favored nations clause, which means that whoever's most favored in that particular deal, the other one would get the equal amount. So, for example, if the master owner said, we want 50, even if the publisher agreed to 10, the publisher would automatically be at 52.
Okay, so basically means
$100,000 license.
It means you can't get screwed by making a first deal, sort of.
Yeah, I mean, it means that basically it's going to be an even amount.
Even amounts, yeah.
The most favored clause means that whoever's most favored in that agreement, it's going to be an equal amount. So the short answer to your question is yes, it's 50%. The long answer, which just gets a little bit more involved, which if you're a musician and you're licensing your songs and you own all of that, you don't have to worry about that. But when you're dealing with publishers, major corporations, and record labels, again, major corporations, that's when that can get a little tricky. So that's where the most favored nations clause comes in.
Okay, no, that's great. So when we're in this COVID post-touring mode, and one of the things that we talked about when we spoke last week was, there used to be this perception that all the money's sort of on the road and for live performances, and you had a different take on whether that was actually ever the case. Or tell me about your take on, where the money was or is.
I mean, you have to look at it like, as a musician, if you're a sideman playing for an artist, the artist is making a lot of money when they're out on the road, and you're getting, a paycheck, but the problem with that, I love traveling, by the way. I love touring, and that's
Yeah.
definitely a thing I've done, as you know, throughout my career a lot. But the nice thing about touring for me is that I've never relied on the income from it. That's kind of like almost like a paid vacation, where you get to travel and have some fun.
Great.
Because
Yeah.
the problem with that, as we've seen now, I live in Nashville now. I left Los Angeles a number of years ago, moved back to Nashville. So between my friends in Los Angeles who tour with huge artists, and of course here in Nashville, a lot of my friends play with big country artists and whatnot. Their income instantly stopped. And the problem with their situations is that they didn't set themselves up for any long-term really success. Like, they have no passive income. Their income is totally based on the shows that they play and the hours that they're out on the road, playing,
Hmm.
or, the shows that they're playing, or the hours that they're downtown playing shows or doing, whatever. They're paid basically by the hour, to perform. And now that shuts down, they're all out of work. They're all out of work. A lot of them are really struggling too. And it's really a shame because, when they're not on the road, if they're out on the road on, say, Thursday to a Sunday, and then they come home, kind of how I did it when I first moved to Nashville and I was building my trailer music company. I got a gig with a country artist. I was out on the road from Thursdays to Sundays. Sundays I came back, I did my grocery shopping and my laundry. And starting Monday through Wednesday and even Thursday afternoon, I was constantly writing and building the catalog again, because getting that catalog out there, getting those songs placed, having that upfront income from the sync fees, right? Because you have those upfront license fees. That's one form of income. That's the immediate income. But then you also have the passive income, which is the royalty stream for when those songs are played. And the nice thing about that is, I know that we're going through this craziness right now, but I don't feel it at all. And I even think back to when 2008, 2009. Life was a little different back then for me. I was living in an apartment in North Hollywood. I didn't have a mortgage and stuff like that. But I remember, people talking about, like, oh, how, the Great Recession and this and that. And I remember thinking, like, man, I don't feel any of it. In fact, at that point, my career was growing because I was getting more and more and more placements. That even now, when people talk about that, I think that it didn't resonate with me at all, and it still doesn't, because I had that passive income stream created. So I was getting income from the shows that were playing my music, but then shows were also still being filmed and produced, and so I was still getting that upfront. So the fact that we were in that recession, it didn't hit me at all. And even with COVID, what's happening right now, the only thing that I feel, the only thing is the fact that I'm not going out a couple times during the week to go have dinner with some friends. That's literally it. Aside from that, and wearing face masks go into the grocery store,
Right.
it hasn't hit me. And again, it just comes down to the fact that, while touring is great and it's a lot of fun and I enjoy it, and I'm a performer and a guitar player first before
Yeah.
anything. But
Yeah.
the reality is, as musicians looking long term, fortunately, I guess I've always thought this way. And I worked with composers when I first got to LA in the early 2000s, and I think a lot of that really was instilled in me at a younger age, on how they were building their catalog, and they were building really their wealth doing the stuff that they loved. And I loved seeing that with these composers who were living these incredible lives, making great money, writing great music, and every day loving what they did. And then I'd see my friends who were playing in bands and playing the Sunset Strip and trying to get the ball rolling, and they were just struggling and barely getting by. And I remember thinking, like, man, this is so much cooler than this. And
Right.
that's kind of how I transitioned from playing guitar on shows to starting to get my music placed, because I thought, man, this is so much better than. And I did try and go for the record deal, and I had a band and we did all that stuff. But it was nice, even while I had that band, trying to get the record deal, those songs were getting played on all these TV shows. So that was always generating income, even while we were out there, pursuing the traditional music industry route.
So you started by licensing existing tracks from your band, basically. That's how you got in.
Yeah. So when I left New York in the late 90s, and I moved to Nashville, and I lived in Nashville for 4.5 years. And during that time, I wrote a lot of songs, and I got turned down by everyone. Every publisher turned me down because I wasn't writing country music,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
I don't know why I moved to Nashville that time, but for whatever reason, I moved to Nashville. In hindsight, I wouldn't have done that. But I did, and it was great. But I struggled like so bad. I struggled so hard, during that time. Finally, I'd had enough, and I left, and I went to LA. And when I got to LA, I ended up just, I think Nashville was really my college education in a way where it broke me out of this little shy cocoon that I lived in, and it got me out speaking to people, and I started learning the business, and I started learning how important it was to know the business if I was going to succeed in the industry. I got to spend a lot of time in studios. I got to spend a lot of time with session musicians, and I really got to learn that world. So when I got to Los Angeles, I already had a lot of experience, and that's what opened up the door for me to, I was there a couple of weeks, and I got a gig playing on a TV show. And then through that's how I started.
As a session player, as a player.
Yeah, as a
Okay.
guitar player, just a chance conversation that happened at a Starbucks. All of my big events in my life, by the way, happened chance meetings and conversations at a coffee shop. But
Tip number one, folks. Tip number one.
well, tip number one is to open your mouth and talk to people.
Yeah, right. Right.
And because you never know who you're going to meet, and that's really
true.
what it was,
That's true.
And so I started seeing how they were writing. And he lived up in Malibu, and I'd sit and watch him write and compose for, to the scenes, and then I'd, go and play the little guitar parts he wanted me to play. And I was fascinated by it. But then I had already had a pretty good collection of songs. I probably had 45, 50 songs
Oh, really? Wow.
he produced that I'd been turned down by every publisher in Nashville for. But when I got to Los Angeles, when I got that gig and I started meeting music supervisors, I didn't know who these people were, but I met a couple. And then at one point I figured the time was right. I really waited until I felt the time was right. I didn't want to step on anyone's toes, but I remember saying to this one supervisor, I said, could I bring you a CD of some songs just to kind of get your take on it? And she said, sure. And then the next day I brought her a CD, and 2 weeks later I had my first featured vocal placement on a show called Cold Case. And at that point it was just like,
wow.
Okay, let's do this. This is easy.
How did you gauge whether the time was right?
That's a good question.
Was it the relationships or the quality of the material, or?
Oh no, the material at that point was on. I'd spent a lot of time honing my mixing and my engineering and my songwriting abilities. I look back on it now and I don't think those songs were great, but at that time they were good. They were the best I could do. And I think that's another thing too. I grew up in a small town in upstate New York. We didn't even have one stoplight. That's how kind of small it was. But I remember I played with a guy up there for years. He was like a year or two older than me. And I learned something from him. He would always be like, well, I'm not going to do this until this is done. I'm not going to do this until this, I'm not going to go to that club and book us a gig until, our CD is done, in 6 months. And everything was just, delayed by years ultimately. And it drove me insane. I'm like, why don't we just go play a show at this club? We don't have to go into the studio and make a record. Let's go play a Friday night at this club. Well, we're not going to go do this until this. And I remember always thinking, that's the worst approach anyone can ever have, because, nothing ever got done. And so for me, I think I was so annoyed by that approach that I became the opposite. I was like, I'm just going to go out and put stuff out there and we'll see what happens. And yeah, I got rejected a lot. I got rejected over and over and over for 4.5 years. But at the same point, that rejection always made me go, how can I make this next batch of songs bulletproof? And I thought I would make them bulletproof. I'd analyze the mixes. I do everything I thought I could do. I thought they were the best songs I could write. I thought they were the best mixes I could do. And they were at the time. And eventually I found the right home for them, because I got turned down by every publisher in Nashville. But when I moved out to Los Angeles and I got that first foot in the door, which was really just finally saying, hey, can I bring you a CD? Within a year after that, I had all those songs placed on multiple TV shows and films. So it actually proved to me that it had nothing necessarily to do with the quality of the music. I think, now I listen back, it's been, 17 years, and the quality of what I produce now and right now is miles ahead of what that was back then. And even the technology, I was recording that stuff on an old VS-880 Roland 8-track. It's laughable compared to now what we have for hardly anything on such a powerful system, right?
Yeah.
I would just put it out there, and I'd get the feedback. They'd say, no, it wasn't good enough. I try and make it bulletproof the next time around. And ultimately, when I got it into the licensing world, that's when I realized, You know what? It's really just a matter of finding the right home,
Hmm.
right? And I found that with licensing, the fact that I was an independent musician, the fact that I had my own publishing, the fact that I owned my masters, the fact that everything was easily clearable just by shooting me an email or giving me a quick phone call, and they could clear it, a lot less than they could, a Elton John song or something like that. That's what made the catalog of songs that I had valuable. And that's why I started getting a lot of placements. And then inevitably, once I got into that world and I had one or two connections with supervisors, they would start recommending me to their friends as well. So it really
So
branched
once you
out.
had some inside information or mentoring, they were able to trust you. They trusted you. They were able to point you in the right direction to their peers.
Yes. Yeah. Or it was one of those things where their peers would be like, hey, do you have anything that's something like this? They said, yeah, there's this guy that we know. Here's one of his tracks. And I'd get a call from someone who I had never met with before, a supervisor, who'd be like, hey, so-and-so recommended this track to me. And, I love it. And we want to use it in the show, So that's how it was happening really behind the scenes. I wasn't really out there marketing that. They were all their own little network,
Hmm.
sharing stuff.
Hmm.
And it was wonderful.
It seems like sync licensing and placements have become a big topic of conversation with musicians. Maybe it was lesser known before, but now everybody's like, oh, I gotta get some placements, gotta get some placements.
Yeah.
So that's great with all the TV shows that are happening or that were happening and will be happening soon again. But what's your take on genres? Are there certain genres that are shifting or changing or more popular, or should you be focusing, or should you be trying to,
Oh,
how should an artist, should they say, I know there's lots of hip hop, I'm going to start making hip hop, or I'm
yeah.
another like, what I mean? What's your take on the genre piece?
I think that's a great question. So the first thing that I tell anyone who wants to get into licensing, first off, you're right. Licensing is a hot topic, right? And especially living in Nashville now, you know, back when we could go out, I'd go out to a bar or hang out with some friends, and you'd hear songwriters be like, "Oh, I'm just doing a lot of sync, just doing a lot of sync." And of course, I'd start asking, so, oh, who are you sending your music out to? Oh, we're just blasting everyone, and what I realized is that while it's a popular topic and people know that music supervisors are important, the approach is 100% wrong. And I think that's the reason why it is definitely a hot topic, because musicians know that there's good money in it. There's a great revenue stream from it on the back end, and it's a great outlet for their music without having to sign their life away to a publishing deal or a record label deal. But at the same point, I think the reason why a lot of people are not successful with it is because they go about it wrong. So the first, because it's not the same approach that we're used to in the music industry, which in the music industry is basically finish your song and then or finish your album and then send it out to everyone. That's not going to work in the licensing world at all. So if that's the approach that you're taking and you're like, man, licensing sucks, I haven't had any luck with it, that's probably because your approach has been 100% wrong. You have to understand, first off, that when you're licensing your music, you're not working in the music industry. Someone who's licensing your song working on a TV show does not work in the music industry. Someone working on a film is not working in the music industry. So the way they absorb and really ingest music into their catalog is entirely different. The way that they search for music, the entire process is completely different. All right. So even the process of recording music is the same. The process of delivering it and getting out to the right people, who I call your end users, is entirely different. So that's the first thing to understand. But
Tell
even
me, I'm sorry,
before
tell me a thing or two that makes, how would you define what some of the differences are?
Sure. Well, if you're sending your music out, well, let's take one step back and then we'll move forward.
Great.
So the first thing here is because this will kind of answer the first half of that question. Uh, uh, um, the first thing I tell anyone is to stop watching TV. In the evening when you watch TV, stop focusing in on the visuals of it. In the storyline, just stop watching. Just lay it on your couch, close your eyes, and just listen to the music that's in the background. Right? That's the first thing, because you have to start getting a feel for the different types of music that are being used in different shows. All right. So you said earlier something about a lot of people using hip hop and this and that, and that's great. So if you write hip hop, that's awesome, because hip hop's used a lot. But at the same point, you actually have to start paying attention to where it's getting used, right? So you don't want to just blast your stuff out there, because there might be someone who's working on a show like Outlander where they're using like Scottish music, and there could be someone who's working on a show like Flip or Flop where they're using upbeat driven like rock tracks and stuff like that, or pop tracks and stuff like that, and that hip hop would have nothing to do with either of these people doing their job. So you're really wasting their time. You're kind of blacklisting yourself, to be honest with you. But you're not providing any value. And you're really wasting your time too, and your effort. The whole goal here is to find the we'll say like 5 or 6 people or productions, TV shows, whatever, that are using that particular style of music that you write, and then focusing in on them. That's where your time is going to be best used. So that's the first thing, right? That's
So
really
take the sweet spot of what you're already creating, what you love, and find the right shows or networks or
to.
production companies. Yeah.
Yeah, because you have to keep in mind that when it comes to licensing music, that is the last part of the process
Right.
on their end. So if we look at a TV show, just for the heck of it, let's look at a TV show. Uh, as musicians, now we're like, oh, I want to get my music on that TV show. But we have to stop that. We have to take a step back, and we have to look at the people who are working on that show and the positions that they're in, and the position that they're in the production process. Music is post-production. It comes after they've written the show, after it's been passed by the production people, and given the green light, after the actors have been cast, after the locations have been scouted, after the permits have been pulled, after all the people have been hired to actually go and do the production and shoot the stuff. There's a lot of stuff that's going on way before it gets to the time to put your music into a scene. And when it gets to that time to put that music into the scene, the director, the producer, the supervisor, a lot of people have had a lot of time to think about exactly what they're looking for in that scene, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your music just doesn't happen to end up there. There's been a long planning process to get there, and now they're looking for the right music for that scene. And that music can play a lot of roles. It can play the role of complementing the action on the scene. It can play the role of maybe fixing. Maybe there's a bad actor who didn't do so good a job, so it plays the role of fixing. Taking your attention maybe away from the bad acting. Maybe something got missed along the way or cut out in order to fit a certain timeline for the actual show. So the music has to get in. It has to actually tell a story that's not even being told visually because it had to get cut out for whatever reason. So music plays a lot of different roles. Okay.
I'm remembering the phrase from my filmmaker days of source music. So it's music that we've been playing in the room where that scene, so it's got to be specific to that time and place.
Yes, exactly. And so when it comes to that, now that we understand with the positioning of the music, okay, and the roles of the people who are putting that music in there, now we have to actually think of how are these people who are, under a time crunch, they have deadlines. The licensing world, the deadlines are very real. In the TV production world, the deadlines are very real. So they have to find the right piece of music and then they have to license it. So what are they going to do? Well, now they're going to look through this database of music, whether it's their database that they have on their laptop, or it could be a database from various libraries that they have access to, the production company has a deal with, that they have access to. And they're ultimately looking through hundreds of thousands of songs. So when it comes to this scene, what are they going to do to find your song? Well, they're going to type in specific elements of that scene that they need that song to, play nice with, right? Think of it like that, and so they might type in some descriptive words for the scene. They might, let's just say, for example, there's like a scene where a bunch of people are out on the beach playing volleyball and and having a good time, and there's a party going on and stuff like that. Well, in that situation, they might type in things like, beach, ocean, summer, it could be like bikini, beach ball, ukulele. The ukulele is kind of synonymous, that kind of stuff, right? So they're going to type in these things, but then they think, okay, we want a happy, fun, upbeat ukulele type of song, but we want with a female vocalist, and they're going to have a very specific thing of what they're looking for. So they're going to type in all these keywords. And if you're just blasting your music out to people without actually inputting thorough metadata that describes every single track that you're sending out, then that music will never be found. Right. So it starts there. Now you have to think of it like, okay, now they found my song. Okay. I got to the bottom of this search. Okay. And we'll say there's 5 songs that they finally narrowed it down.
Let me just ask you one question about metadata. Yeah. Would you put the metadata in an Excel sheet? Would you put it in on the MP3? Where does the artist need to put their metadata for it to be found and searchable?
So that's a good question. It's going to depend on the outlet that they're using to get their music out there.
Okay.
So if they're sending stuff directly to a music supervisor, then they'd have to put the music, the metadata directly onto the audio file, because then that audio file would be ingested into the supervisor's catalog on their computer, and it would have to be searched that way. Now, there's a whole process to metadata. And metadata is not like a 10-minute conversation.
Right.
This is like
there's
a lot to it. but think of it like this. You can use different programs, and you can use programs like something like iTunes, which most of us have iTunes, right? iTunes is like Twitter. You're very limited in what you can put on it, right? But at
Mm-hmm.
the same point, this is where it can get tricky. Again, this is where you can't just blindly send stuff out. This is why I think a lot of musicians get it wrong, right? Even if
Mm-hmm.
they are like, oh, I got this program called, Sound Miner. I'm putting all this amazing metadata on my tracks. That's great. You can find plenty of information online on how to do that. And then you sent out this, massive, file of metadata. But let's say that the music supervisor who's using that is using iTunes as their catalog to
Mm-hmm.
house all
Mm-hmm.
their music. Well, iTunes allows for this much. You've added this much, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what happens? Well, all of that other stuff disappears, and then you only have this much. Well, if the important information like the songwriter and the publisher and all the other, PRO information is all down here, and that got truncated out of there, well, again, now you just
Mm-hmm.
lost out on the opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot more to it, to understanding how to do this, than just add metadata to the file. And it can be involved. Now, the other thing is, if you are working through a library, and the library is using an online platform like Source Audio, then yeah, you would generally send it to them through a spreadsheet, and then on the back end, the library would convert that to a CSV file and upload all of that information onto the back end of the platform. This is a
Yeah.
multi-million dollar industry. So there are systems put in place that make it very easy once you know the process.
Right.
But yeah, going back to the example, like,
Okay. Sure.
so let's say you get down, your song is narrowed down to the 5 songs that they want to choose. That's great. You had great metadata. That's a great start. Now you're in the running. But what else are you adding? Are you sending like instrumental mixes? Do you have stem mixes? Do you have other various alternate mixes? Because the editor, and again, there's other people further down the line than you in the production, in the post-production process. Once your song gets licensed, it's going to hit a music editor, then it's going to hit a re-recording mixer, right? And just think of it like this: we mix our songs in stereo. Most TV shows and films are in 5.1 or 7.1. So are you providing, say, stem mixes, which would allow then a re-recording mixer to place your music, within that stereo, within that surround field? That's not just a stereo, track going around. And that's very important too. So that plays a big role as well. Being able to provide multiple versions and stems is so crucial to securing multiple consistent placements. So again, that's why the process of writing and recording music is exactly the same. But from the time you mix your song to the time you deliver it, it's an entirely different process when you're going the licensing route than when you're going the traditional music industry route. And that's where most musicians get mixed up. They follow the traditional music industry route, and they try and apply that to the licensing world, and then they wonder why they've never had any success. That's the reason why.
Right. That's fascinating. That's great. That's great. It's not just, here's my music, I hope you dig it. It's knowing. Are there
Yep.
any styles or genres you see coming, trends or popular, or just,
Well, trending right now on commercials because of the COVID thing has been a lot of ballady,
really?
introspective. I don't want to say sad. It's not sad, but it's been. I'm trying to think of the word right now, but I can't think of it. But it's not sad. It's maybe meandering is not really the right word either. But
we're all in this together kind of a thing,
yeah, but it hasn't. Yeah. It's there's definitely a couple trends going right now, just at least with the commercials. Commercials trend pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
As far and I think that commercials will trend very quick. That's been my experience, that commercials will trend very quickly. And then trailers for films will also trend. It's a bit of a slower pace for those to get into a trend. But when it comes to actual shows, no, because shows really have their own sound. Maybe one show's all like kind of quirky, weird, comical music that you'd never hear on the radio. That's its own weird little, genre for that show. Meanwhile, another show might be a period piece back to the early 1900s. That's going to be its own thing, maybe like 1920s ish jazz kind of stuff, and then you have other stuff that's very modern, some is futuristic, so it's going to be a lot of electronic music and stuff like that. So on the TV show realm, I don't feel that there's trends. Each show develops its own sound. That's
Mm-hmm.
why it's important to listen.
Mm.
But as far as following trends, that's definitely going to be more in the advertisement world, and advertisements would be commercials and trailers.
Mm. Any shows right now that you can think of that are really inspiring you or interesting to you, or whether it's creatively or they're using a lot of music? I don't know, just any TV or
So,
things that are popping
the
out for you.
shows that actually really inspire me, and it's really because I just, stylistically who I am. I like the home building shows, home
Mm,
renovation shows.
mm,
Stylistically, musically, those are. Uh, it's funny. I was sitting with my fiance recently, and we were watching, like, we did a whole afternoon of Fixer Upper.
hmm.
I mean, not a whole afternoon. We'll just say
Yeah,
we probably did, like, like 2 hours, 2.5
yeah,
hours,
yeah.
whatever. And really each episode is 20 something minutes. And I remember the whole time I was really caught up in listening just to the music, and so much so that I actually started, hearing, oh, okay, that track's really simple. It's just a slightly distorted bass line, okay, and this is what the bass line's doing. It's like a 1-4-1-5 kind of a thing. Okay, and
Hmm.
and I locked it in my head. I'm like, oh, this will be so easy to do this kind of stuff. I can knock out 5 of these tomorrow or whatever. But as we kept watching, I was like, they just used this song in the last episode. And I noticed as I was going through, as we were going through through that afternoon of those episodes, I kept, from episode to episode, I kept pointing out, like, they used this exact. She's like, how do you know this? I said, because I'm listening to it, and I'm literally dissecting it in my ears, because I'm figuring out how to write this stuff, because it's so easy,
That's great.
And
That's
but on top of it, like, then I'm actually hearing the guitar tones and what the guitar is doing. Now this is just because, of I obviously, like, I don't have perfect pitch, but relative pitch I can hear what the bass line is
yeah,
doing.
yeah,
Figure it
yeah.
out. And yeah, and I had locked that in my head. I'm like, oh, okay, this would be so easy to do. I could basically do this the reverse way. And the other thing too, with also, like, a lot of the car shows, where they, are building cars and stuff like that, because those are all just really cool, fun driving rock tracks, guitar oriented. And those are the ones that always inspire me, because I can come in to my studio and I can knock that stuff out so quick, and it's fun. And there's always going to be a place for it, but you can just do them so quick, and that's what I enjoy. Instead of practicing guitar, I can sit down and come up with a little line, and then add a couple of guitar parts above it, throw in some drums, the bass part, and then that's done, an hour later, and create.
That's great. Well, so just taking that example further, though, if you were inspired by that, you had 5 new ideas, you went to the studio the next day and did 5 or 10 of these cues. Would you just put those in your library? Would you try to pitch to that show, or would you tell one of your library people? How would you take next step on that using that
Yeah,
inspiration?
yeah, I'd put it in my library, and the biggest thing is the metadata. In that case, the metadata for those would be, like, like, for example, if it's gonna be like that poppy guitar stuff, lots of delay, very open tracks, which would be more like a HGTV kind of a thing. Yeah, I would use, like, metadata, like home improvement, that kind of stuff, building, fixer upper, that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
and at that point, it really kind of becomes, metadata is what ultimately is going to get that track placed. Because most of those shows, in those cases, they don't actually have music supervisors. The editors, those production companies have deals with different libraries. And the cool thing now with, with everything, with Netflix and Hulu and all the stuff, that you can just hit pause during the credits in shows. You can just see what libraries a lot of those shows are pulling their music from. The music provided by.
oh
You know,
really? Oh, okay.
yeah. And so at that point, then I'll just go, and it's really going to be, there's a bunch that do a lot of the shows over and over and over, and I'm fortunate to be connected with one. And so at that point, I just add it into my catalog, and yeah, and it gets used, and it doesn't, not only does it get used in those shows, but then it gets used in stuff that I had no expectation it would get used in. And the whole purpose, my whole process is based around consistent placements. So I don't look at it, even though I've had big placements. I've had a Super Bowl commercial, I never expected to have it, but I mean, that's like the pinnacle of the placements that you can have, right? But at the same point, it's like, I don't expect to have those a lot. I have a theme song on a Saturday morning kids show. I don't expect to have a lot of those in my career. And while those are great paydays, you can't retire on them. So the whole purpose, my whole focus is on consistent placements. And if I can consistently come into my studio and play guitar and have a good time and get music out there that's consistently getting placed, so that it sustains me, but then also sustains me through, like, this kind of crap, like the COVID stuff and all this madness, then that's a great career, because I get to do all the things that I really enjoy doing.
That's great. That's really great. Hey, so this has been a lot of really great, really specific, really actionable feedback. Really
Good,
appreciate it.
good.
Let's talk about the free gift you're going to offer and a little bit about your course and your courses coming up in the future.
Sure. Yeah, so so what we covered today, actually, we talked about two things, right? Um, we talked about I talked very briefly about what I call creating valuable content, which is creating stems and alternate mixes,
Hmm.
and and how important those are. That's actually step two in my process. And then we talked about metadata, fairly extensively, and that's actually step three. So I have a four-step process that I use and I've been using for years to get consistent placements. And so, a lot of people asked me for years, how to do this. So I wrote a little book, which people can download. So that's the free gift. You can go, you can download this little free book called Master Music Licensing, the 4-step plan to licensing success. And in it, I outline the actual 4 steps that I use, all 4
Beautiful.
steps.
That's great.
And you can download that, and you can learn, uh, you know, basically the 4 steps. And this is really for people who are so focused on or so used to the music industry path. This is going to be a big mindset shift for you because we're going to show you some new stuff that you haven't even thought about when it comes to licensing your music. Because these steps don't play any role in the music industry pursuit. Metadata and alternate versions and stuff like that. And that plays zero role when you're creating a record and sending it out to radio stations.
Right.
Um, or fans or whatnot, but it's extremely important in the licensing world. So yeah, you can download the ebook. It's for free, and you'll have a link that you can post. And yeah, and then and then through that, after I released that, I had a lot of people asking for more information, so I created a course called Master Music Licensing. I open that course about 3 times a year. And it's literally an all-in. It's the full framework of licensing. It's and in it there's a lot of extra stuff too. I interview a lot of I interview a lot of other professionals in the sync world.
That's great.
You get access to a private mastermind community that I'm a part of, and there's just a lot of cool stuff that comes with that course. But that's only open a couple times throughout the year.
Okay, great. So if you get download the free gift, you'll get on Michael's mailing list, and you'll hear about those courses when they're available. And yeah, it's in my experience of pitching stuff to film and TV and friends, there's a lot to manage, and it's sort of a big confusing uh,
Yeah,
gestalt.
it can be, and again, like well,
Not
no, there,
confusing. It's like I think you just have to know the steps, right? You have to know the
yeah, you have to.
pathways.
Yes, exactly. You just have to understand that the path that you've probably been going down with the music pursuit, you kind of have to build a wall between the two, because this is an entirely different path, right? And you just have to understand that, like, some of this stuff that you've learned here is not going to apply. It's not going to break through that wall, right? So that's really, you're learning something new, but it's not difficult. It's actually, licensing music to me, I think, is 10,000 times easier than the music industry path. And I went down the music industry path for a long time. I went after the publishing deal. I was in multiple bands, did a lot of records between New York and Nashville and Los Angeles, and went after every record label. And I mean, I pursued that hard for so many years, and that's a difficult path. It's a difficult path to build fans and all that kind of stuff. But licensing is easy. All you have to do is you have to present your music in a very valuable way that your end users can utilize it, and you're basically serving them. And it's not about you. It's about serving them so that they can see their vision through, because you're ultimately helping a director and a producer and all the people on the production team. You're helping them see their vision through to completion, and your music plays an important role, right? But it's not about you. It has nothing to do with you. You're
Right.
serving the role of the scene.
Well, yeah. I mean, breaking through as a major pop artist, it's like lightning striking, right?
Yeah.
It's so many things out of our control. Also, when I used to be a film and TV producer, I sat in the editing rooms a lot, and I knew the process that we went through in the editing room. And I was the producer of these things with the director and the editor, and everyone's got their opinions. And as I shifted to being more the music professional, I went like, that is a mess. Those the chances of someone breaking through as a musician in a film project was slim, but there's
Yeah.
a whole different way to look at it, and you're identifying the people and the culture of people who are looking and what they're looking for.
Yeah. Ultimately, the whole goal is just to be a service. You're being a service to them. Your music is providing a service to them. right? And I think if when you can step back from being the artist and always having it be your way, and you can step back and just go, how can I provide a service? How can I write music that I really enjoy? But how can I have it also be very valuable to these end users to help them tell their story? When you can lock that in, that's when you can have a great career, you know, writing the music that you want to write, you know, and making great money by licensing your music. And then the other thing too is then you can also do the other stuff that, you know, that like the artist pursuit. It doesn't mean you have to stop the artist pursuit. You know, you can still do the artist pursuit. You got to keep in mind that if you're pursuing the artist route, when you are taking your art songs and promoting them, you're promoting them in a certain way to the traditional music industry path, right? But when
Hmm.
you're going to take them down the licensing route, you have to do some, you know, slight tweaks to that whole approach. But ultimately, you know, you're just being a service and you're just providing great music, and it's a lot of fun. And you know, if I can jump in,
Oh yeah,
I do
sure,
want to
please.
say one thing.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm excited about being a part of this because, you know, it's always fun to be a part as a speaker, you know, of these events. But at the same point, I also follow these also, you know, just like anyone else watching, I'm going to watch the other presenters. And I
yeah,
do want to talk because I know you have one particular presenter. When I
yeah.
moved to Nashville in 98, end of 98, I joined NSAI.
Oh,
Yeah,
great.
you know, he was trying to become a better songwriter.
Yeah, yeah.
And I remember one of the events, one of those nights, a guy named Jason Bloom came
Ah,
and he
yes.
spoke, and I bought his book. And I not only did I read, but like I took like a lot of notes. I highlight stuff a lot, so there's lots of green if you can see it or not. But there's
That's
lots of
great.
green in the book, and it's funny because, you know, he even signed it for me and whatnot. But you know, I think that even back then, you know, taking you know, just little nuggets of information and stuff from as many different sources as I could to help become a better songwriter. I think all of that played a big role. So I'm excited to you know, I'm excited to be a part of this because some of the guests that you've had actually, you know, played a role also in my younger years, you know, coming up and developing my own
Yeah,
sound.
I'm a fan of that book as well. I've got a newer edition, and really excited to have Jason on as part of this thing. And
That's
he's
awesome.
yeah, Jason's been a great source. It's just, you know, we're all trying to take in all this information and find the right. You never know whose class or whose wisdom is going to impact what part of our careers, right?
Yeah, yeah, and you know the thing is it's I always enjoyed learning from people who actually did stuff, you know,
Right.
like you know, like kind of like as a kid growing up, you know, I was a fan of this guy named Paul Gilbert, but he always had these videos. That's how I learned how to play guitars. You'd go to the store and you buy these videos, and he was teaching. But then I'd go and I'd see him on tour with like his band and opening up for bands like Rush and stuff like that, you know. And it's like I'm learning from these guys who are doing what I want to do, and so it is fun to be a part of these things, to be able to see other people who are, you know, doing things. Because the thing is that, you know, you can always keep learning. Even though I've had success with licensing, it doesn't mean that I haven't stopped learning, you know, songwriting. And at the same point, it doesn't mean that I don't have other aspirations as a songwriter as well. You know, it's just that this has been a great route to keep the ball moving forward without having to get a job at Home Depot. You know, I can stay in that scene, and I can keep writing music. I can keep developing the craft and keep getting stuff out there. And I love it.
Right. No, that's great. That's great. So, folks, I hope you've learned some things today. Please post your thoughts, your takeaways, your questions in the Facebook group. Maybe we can get Michael to answer some of those.
Sure.
And really excited to get so much great detail and so much inspiration and ways for musicians to make money in these ways and while staying creative. So, thank you, Michael Elsner. Say the company name again. It was
Master Music Licensing.
Master Music Licensing. All right,
Yes.
so we'll see you on the Facebook group. Check out his free gift, and for those about to rock, we salute you.
Right on.
Okay, see you guys. I'm going to stop this now. Cool.